think if you were to ask a bunch of different reptile keepers and amphibian keepers what their ultimate dream would be as far as being a keeper goes, they would describe something very similar to what my guest walks through in this episode. Zach Porritt is my guest today, and he is the creator of the YouTube channel and Instagram page A Life Exotic, and he has constructed a giant greenhouse in his backyard that is essentially a free-range, multi-species cohab environment that replicates the rainforest with a giant monster predator fish pond in it, and he has everything from Dendrobates terribilis on the floor all the way up to a large Amazon puffing snake slithering through the trees. It is an unbelievable setup, and in the episode, Zach walks us through how he constructed the greenhouse, the equipment that he uses to control the climate and to actually make sure that the building itself is escape-proof, and how he's established the proper substrates and soils. You know, you talk about mixing substrates and soils for a small vivarium like I have behind me. Just imagine doing it for a 20 by 30 structure. The episode is unbelievable. I absolutely love watching this project develop, and there's just so much more for Zach to do in the future. It'll be very interesting to see how it progresses over time and how the species interact with each other. I don't think I'm going to say anything more. Let's just jump into this episode. Enjoy. As you can see, it's nighttime behind me. That's why the lights in the vivarium are off. I hope you had a great day today. Thank you for tuning into the episode, and enjoy. Zoomed is one of the most recognizable brands when it comes to reptile lighting, and later on in this episode, I want to tell you more about one of their products that will allow you to simulate both a sunrise and a sunset, which in my opinion is one of the coolest things you can do with your reptile lighting. So if that's something you're interested in learning about, make sure you stick around through the rest of the episode, and I will tell you more about it then. Well, Zach, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, man. I'm excited for this one.
Well, you have one of the probably most interesting projects on the go right now, and I think in most reptile keeper terms, it's probably the dream or if you ask anybody how they want to keep their animals at some point in the future, they'll basically paint a picture of what you've created in your backyard, a greenhouse with free range animals and tons of space and plants and everything. So I want to first start with what motivated you to jump into such a gargantuan project? Because like I said, this is like the dream for most people, but most people have just not the time or the ability to actually do this, or even the confidence to step into something so big. It's more of like a pipe dream for most people. So what actually tilted the scale for you to actually jump into this?
So it's I've told variations of this story a few times, and it's kind of just a lifelong thing. Like you said, it's a pipe dream for most people. I was no different. I always had the idea in the back of my mind that something like this was possible, but when I first was getting into reptiles and stuff as a teenager, it was like a total taboo thought, you know? Like even cohabbing stuff or putting things in too big of an enclosure was kind of a thing back then. Like even if you got a new snake and put it in too big of an enclosure, people would kind of bash you on it. It was looked at as like a real risky, negative thing. So like the idea of what I'm doing now was absolutely taboo back then. So I was a novice keeper, you know, and I just kind of kept that idea to myself in the back of my head. And as years went on, a couple decades went on, I just slowly started to think like more and more like, I think it is possible. Like based off all the experience I've had, I think it's possible. I don't think it's easy by any means. But so it was always this pipe dream in the back of my head. It started out as like a bedroom. I wanted to like waterproof and turn a bedroom into a giant walk-in viv. And then it slowly spiraled out of control. I kind of got the greenhouse idea, and I was just like in the back of my head, that'd be really cool. That'd be really cool. And then I just kind of hit this point in life where I'd been wanting to do something different with my life for a while. I'd just been working construction through my 20s. I was working on the road out of town pipelining, and I was just kind of burnt out on it. And I was like, I feel like life's losing its point. I don't feel like I'm doing anything cool, anything that I'm super passionate about. And one day it just kind of clicked with me that like the whole greenhouse thing, I was like, you know, I should just do it. I'm sick of living life and not doing cool stuff that inspires me. I'm sick of not doing stuff that inspires other people. You know, this is a huge risk, but I've been thinking about it for years and thinking about the logistics of it for years. And I do think it's possible. So I just like finally hit the breaking point one day where I was like, you know, I'm just doing something cool. I don't know where to start. This is going to be it. And we'll see where it leads. And I think I thought that. And then like 5-6 days later, I rented a skid steer and started doing it. So I don't know, It just kind of hit a breaking point in life. I wanted to do something I was passionate about, and that was what I was the most passionate about.
That's one of those ideas where you probably have to start doing it as soon as possible. Like once you've kind of, like you said, you hit that breaking point where you feel like you've committed to it, you probably need to start the project super quickly because the rational part of your brain will talk yourself out of it pretty quick. Like, this is a terrible idea. So it's like as soon as you start digging a hole, it's too late to turn back, and you just have to go ahead with it.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. It's one of those things. It's a big commitment, and you just gotta full commit right at the start. I remember there's a point where we had the hole dug because we did the whole geothermal system. I'm sure we'll talk about later. So it started out as an 8 foot pit in the ground, and like it's 20 by 30 and 8 foot deep. So that's the amount of dirt that comes out of a hole that size is a lot more than most people think because dirt like loosens as you bring it out. So I remember the skid steer, like the dirt filled the whole backyard. I'd have to drive the skid steer on top of the dirt pile, probably like 12, 14 feet high, flatten it out, and then put more dirt on top. And I remember one time I was sitting there just staring from the top of the dirt pile, and I was like, oh no, what have I done? I was like,
Yeah.
this is going to be my whole life for a while now. This is quite the commitment. And I was not wrong.
And not to mention too, like you're also thinking long term, like, am I going to stay at this property for a long time? Like, is this where my home is going to be? Like, you're digging a giant hole in the ground and putting basically a permanent structure in the backyard. So it's not just like getting a new Viv for your living room. There's a lot to it. Did you have? Maybe we'll just talk about the building of it. The bait, like you'd already mentioned the size, but maybe you can re-mention it if people missed it. But did you have an idea of what it was going to be, or were you just basically, I'm going to build a greenhouse and have a structure and then start kind of tinkering the inside?
Yeah, I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted it to be, like the layout, the pond, everything like that. I knew what I wanted it to be. I just hadn't worked out like the fine details. I knew that was going to just come and things were going to change as time went on. So the goal was basically just to make it as big as I possibly could, given like the space that I had, which is what we did. We pushed it like I looked up all the codes and everything, because we had to get permits and I did everything. Like I would dig the hole and it would be like 6 inches less big than it could be. And I'd be like, nope, we got to go back in and dig it more. And everybody helping me is like, are you serious? Like 6 inches doesn't matter. But I was like, no, it has to be as big as possible because I know if not, I'm going to regret it being too small. So yeah, that was pretty much the plan. Just go as big as possible to give myself enough creative room to get the inside to look how I envisioned it in my head.
And then, so what about the construction process? Like maybe we'll leave the geothermal, like the technology piece after, but you dug a hole and then how did you build the structure?
Yeah, so we dug the hole, we did the whole geothermal setup and then backfilled that. We had to like backfill it properly and compact it as we went. And then on top of that, we poured a foundation just like you would for any other building, and then cinder block walls. So after the geothermal was backfilled, it was probably like 3 feet below ground level still, 3, 4-ish feet, probably about 3 feet below ground level. So from there, on top of the foundation, we built cinder block walls all the way up to like 3 feet or so above ground. So that was like the main foundation of it. And then from there, I wood framed or timber framed the front and back of the greenhouse. And then I used like EMT conduit to make a custom metal frame for it. And then after that, it was basically just like typical greenhouse construction. If you've looked at how to build poly greenhouses with wiggle wire and stuff, we just framed it out with that. So the actual construction of like, it was a lot of work, but like the actual structure itself is really, really simple. I just had to like really think it through a lot and do a lot of research to make sure it was going to be stable and like safe through storms and stuff like that, especially with it being so tall. Cause it's about like from ground level, I think it's 17 feet tall. So it's pretty
Wow.
big.
Yeah. So it's a very big structure. And then as far as, because you live in a climate that has winter, obviously, so maybe for listeners, you can just give us a sense of where you live and the climate that you're dealing with, maybe both extremes in the summer and in the winter.
Yeah, so I live in northern Utah, and for those that know, we're in agricultural zone 7A, I believe, which means that it like regularly gets down to 0 degrees, I think here. So winters here, typically we have like 3, 4 months of like in the 20s, like in January, it'll be down in the teens. So like I said, sometimes it'll get down to 0, but that's not like super often, but so pretty cold winters. And that's Fahrenheit, by the way. But so like well below freezing. And then summertime is very, very hot. So northern Utah is it's like a desert. So we get cold winters and then we get very hot summers. So it'll get up to like 110 degrees Fahrenheit in the summertime. and it's also very, very dry here. So the dry air was one of the biggest things to combat because I'm building a tropical rainforest, and I mean, we'll have humidity like 15% here for months out of the year, especially in the wintertime now. But summertime, it's not much better. It's like maybe 20, maybe 25% humidity, like very
Really?
low.
Wow. That's yeah. I mean, it's similar. Like our climate here, we get fairly cold and it's super dry in the winter. But the summer where I am, there's a lot of humidity in the air. So I can imagine that dealing with the dry air in the summer is even worse because you're having to deal with the actual heat of the air too, with the temperature, just the air temperature in the summertime. So why don't we talk a little bit about, because it's actually a good case study because you do. It's not like you live in Florida and you're like, oh yeah, it's 80% humidity all the time and it's easy to manage. You actually have to deal with some climate extremes and the outside temperatures. So maybe we can walk through some of the equipment you're using to control the climate within the greenhouse. I mean, why don't we start with the geothermal? How does that work, and what does it do for you?
Yeah, so basically the geothermal, it's like a earth battery system where there's a bunch of different ways to put it. But geothermal is a rough term. Typically, geothermal is referred to like drilling way down in the ground and using the like geothermal energy from water and stuff. That's not what we're doing, so I don't want to misguide anybody. What we did is we dug 8 feet down, and then we did a grid work of like 6 and 4 inch corrugated pipes, and then we have 2 layers of that. They're buried, so each pipe in theory is surrounded by about 2 feet of dirt. And what we do is we pump the air from the very top of the greenhouse through that system all day long, and then it pumps out at just above ground level inside the greenhouse. So what it does is during the day, it takes the hot air from the top of the greenhouse, which is the very hottest air because heat rises. So it takes that super, super hot air and it pumps it through the ground all day. The ground already has a relatively stable temperature compared to above ground. So it cools that air down significantly because the in-ground temperature is probably like in around 55 degrees. So it cools that air down. So during the day, it's actually helping cool the greenhouse quite a bit, which is really important here in the summer. And then at night, it's been pumping that warm air through the ground, kind of heating up the ground a little bit and raising the ambient temperature of the ground. And then it takes the coldest air that's from the top of the greenhouse because it has the most wind exposure. So with no sunlight, wind exposure equals really cold air in the greenhouse. So it takes the coldest air from the top of the greenhouse and it pumps it through that ground that we've kind of been heating all day long and pumps out warmer air at night. So it's kind of this passive system that all it runs is 2 inline like duct fans, just pumps air through it all day, and it kind of just passively cools during the day and heats at night.
Oh,
And that's
that's
not the
really
main
cool.
source of heat, but I think that definitely like helps a lot. And it helps with a lot of things. I think it helps with humidification a little bit too, because we get like some moisture from the ground and groundwater pumping out with the air. So we're pumping in super hot, dry air, pumping out cool, moist air.
Is that a conventional system for greenhouses, or where did you come? Where did you find that?
On YouTube of some other guy that built a greenhouse, like obviously not for reptiles and stuff,
Yeah.
but is just like a passive way of heating and cooling a greenhouse. And that's actually what finally gave me the idea to be like, let's do this. Because I was always worried that the heating and cooling costs would be too much. That's kind of what kept me from doing the greenhouse idea in the first place or like committing to it. And then I found this guy's YouTube series where he did like a geothermal greenhouse. And I kind of emulated his and made like a few minor changes to make it fit my situation. But like yeah, watching his videos and seeing how he did it made me think like, okay, if I like focus on some forms of passive heating and stuff, I think this might actually be doable.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, so I found the geothermal idea is not mine at all. I got that from somebody else.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, my dad actually just recently sent me a video from someone on YouTube who had a greenhouse in the middle of the prairies in Canada, basically a similar climate to where I live, and it's minus 30 Celsius outside, so you're pretty close to minus 30 Fahrenheit, and inside is like regular temperature, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It's nice and warm. It's actually amazing. And he was talking about how little he was spending on heating. It was actually incredible. It's amazing how well a greenhouse can absorb the heat of the sun. It's just that greenhouse effect is such a powerful heater, even in the climate. If the climate is incredibly cold, that infrared energy from the sun is going to get contained in there. So I imagine, is it harder to keep the greenhouse cooler in the summer than it is to keep it warmer in the winter?
Yes. That is the one thing that like everybody gets wrong too is cooling is more difficult than heating. Heating is fairly easy from like, yeah, just like an energy perspective. Heating is not that hard, but yeah, cooling is quite a bit of work. So when we first built the greenhouse, like without any vents or anything, we just had the structure up. it was getting like 120, 130 in there during the day. So it was like miserable. But yeah, we ended up having to cool it with like, I don't know, we have a few different methods of cooling it, but ventilation is a big thing. But that's also tricky because I live in such a dry climate. So if I overventilate, I dry it out. So it's like always this fine balance between ventilating enough to cool it, but creating humidity. And yeah, it's kind of been a challenge to get it, but we've got it pretty dialed in now. So,
So do
or
you
it's been pretty
use
dialed in for the last year or so.
do you use an air conditioning unit at all, or is all the actual cooling of the greenhouse just through ventilation?
So it's through ventilation, but we made a custom kind of swamp cooler. So
Mm.
lots of like commercial greenhouses are run with what they call wet walls, which is basically just one wall of the greenhouse. They put evaporative cooling pads, like the cardboard pads that are in
Yeah.
swamp coolers, and you trickle water through it. So on one side of the greenhouse, up high, I have a big fan that blows air out of the greenhouse. That is my exhaust fan. It's run off a thermostat, so I can set the temperature to whatever I want. So when it gets so hot, that'll turn on. And then on the back lower side of the greenhouse, I also have two large vents that also turn on. They're like louvered vents, so they're closed normally. And when that fan kicks on, those vents automatically open up. So what we did is we built custom wet walls around those vents. So whenever that fan turns on during the summertime, I can turn the wet wall on and off, obviously. But whenever that fan turns on during the summertime, it pulls air through those vents just passively. And then now we have big swamp cooler pads, trickling water basically built into those vents. So that helps because that helps cool it a ton. Like it literally, when you stand in front of the fence, it feels like an air conditioner. It's like cold air coming in. And then it also humidifies the air. So if you were in a
Right.
super like humid climate, a wet wall wouldn't work as good because it's taking the dry air and then it's evaporating all that water and that's what's rapidly cooling the air. But so it's for me, it's kind of a win-win where I'm such a dry climate. It helps cool it quite a bit and it humidifies it a little bit. So instead of bringing in air that's 15% humidity, it's bringing in like 40 or 50% humidity air and it's much cooler.
Yeah. Yeah. It is amazing when you look at a swamp cooler, you think, how is it possibly going to make a room cooler? Because it's just like water flowing through this system. And then, yeah, like you said, you stand in front of it and the water is just sucking the heat right out of the air. So it's I could definitely see how that would work well. Is there, and what about humidity? Is that wet wall basically that's all you're doing for humidity? I know that you have misting systems and whatnot, but that's, I assume, is mostly for the animals, and we'll maybe talk about that a little bit later. But or do you use the misting system to regulate humidity as well?
The misting system is also like a key factor in regulating humidity. Without the
Okay.
misting system, I would probably run like 40 to 50% ambient humidity in there. But with the misting system, I keep it at 80 plus. It rarely gets below 80 at all. Like maybe on a hottest day in the summer during the peak hours of the day, might drop down to like 70. But
Okay. Wow. So it's just, and is that running on like a hydrometer or anything, or like a basically not a thermostat, but I don't like a hydrostat, I guess is that
hygrostat,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So mine is not right now. It's currently on a timer,
Okay.
and but I am going to make some changes to the misting system soon. So right now I have just like a kind of commercial greenhouse misting system. It's run on a timer, so it just mists the crap out of the whole greenhouse for a minute or so every 40 minutes or something like that. But what I want to do is I'm going to add a high pressure misting system. So high pressure misting system, it'll run at like 1500 psi. So it'll produce like a mist that you can't even feel. It's almost like a fog. And I'll have that run on a hygrostat. So that'll basically maintain the humidity and that'll also help with cooling a lot too, because the super, super fine mist evaporates easier, which helps with cooling. And then what I'm going to do is switch my current misting system to a rainfall system. So I'm going to put sprinkler heads on it instead of misting heads. So basically I'll have a super fine mist that goes off for little tiny like 3 or 4 second bursts very often to keep the humidity perfect, but without saturating things. Because that's a problem with the misting system I have right now is it saturates things. So things in there are either wet or dry. It's
Mm.
really hard to find that perfect balance in between. And obviously there's like microclimates, which helps with it. But for the most part, things are wet or dry. So with the high pressure misting system, I'll be able to keep things constantly moist and humid. And then, sorry, I'll be able to control when things are wet with the rain system. And then the other cool thing about the rain system is I'm going to be able to simulate wet and dry seasons with that.
Oh, that's really cool. So then is the nice thing about, well, I can imagine the nice thing about having such a large volume of air is you must not have any issues with like stagnant. I mean, you're running fans all the time, so there's probably no stagnant air, or it probably doesn't smell musty or anything. Your things are flowing, and that's what's. I don't know. Maybe you can let me know. Do you have any issues with that, or do you feel like because there's enough ventilation, even though you're running such high humidities all the time, it's not a big deal?
No, I don't think so. I'm big on ventilation and circulation too. So I run a lot of ventilation, but I also have like just circulation fans all over the greenhouse. So I have like three big overhead fans that have cages around them, and then I have some fans like in the corners. So pretty much like all the plants, if you look at them, all of their leaves are moving slightly. That's kind of like my gauge. As soon as I see plants growing to where they're blocking so much air that I don't see leaves moving anymore, I try to make adjustments. So I actually have quite a lot of airflow in there. You can tell by some of my, if you like watch my Instagram stories, sometimes I post them and it's just like,
Yeah,
that's because
yeah.
I'm standing like under a fan filming. But I do still get like some slight mold buildup on the plastic and stuff, but I pressure wash in there weekly. It's part of my like weekly chores. I just pressure wash and clean everything. And then yeah, for the most part, I thought like underneath the boardwalk and stuff would get super like moist and moldy and nasty, and it actually doesn't because the misting system doesn't soak under there as much. So for the most part, it's just like the right amount of circulation. It seems to keep everything like very fresh, and it never smells bad in there. It always just smells like plants and moss and forest. It smells really good actually. So
And then what about one last equipment question before we move on? What the lighting that you have? Because I imagine the lighting is also something that probably produces heat, maybe even unintentional heat. If you're running, just everybody knows LED lights throw off a lot of heat and whatnot. Do you have specific lights, and are they causing problems with the climate in there, or like maybe tell us what you're running through that?
So I have lighting is one thing that I'm working on revamping this summer, like doing a whole new lighting system. And I'm going to have more coming out on that this spring, summer, but I'm kind of waiting for some products to come out that I think will be a good fit for it. But right now, the main thing, because with lighting and heat and everything like that, like there's plenty of basking spots, you know. The only time is in the winter time. I would like to add some supplemental basking just because sometimes we have 4 or 5 days of cold, you know. But once I'm replicating wet season, I don't think that'll be a problem because it's like that even in the jungle, you know. But the main thing is UV. Like the plastic blocks out all UV. So like my big challenge in the greenhouse is adding just ridiculous amounts of T5, like the strongest, biggest T5 lights I can possibly find to add like specific UV basking spots when I where I know the lizards and everything hang out. So that is, I don't think it causes issues with the climate. Like the amount of heat those lights put off is nothing compared to just the sunlight during the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I honestly don't think the lights make a difference at all in like heat and stuff like that. I think it's just a pain having like 1,000 T5 lights hanging all over the place at random spots. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's kind of one of the main systems. The misting system is what we're working on next. And then I'm waiting on some things, but hopefully soon I can get some new products and kind of design a whole new like lighting system. I'm gonna have like lights on pulleys at different basking spots and like basically I'm gonna have big setups that are like 8 T5s, you know, and I'll
Yes.
have that like every so often at different basking spots.
Oh, that's amazing. So maybe up to this point, we can give the listeners. Maybe I should have started with this, but for listeners that don't have an actual visualization of your project, I'm sure many of them do because they've seen you on Instagram and on YouTube. But maybe you could just walk us through, like when you go through the front door and you're walking through the boardwalk. Just give us a rough kind of visualization of what people would see if they were to walk through the greenhouse.
Yeah, so basically it's a like I said, a 20 by 30 poly lined greenhouse. It's about 16, 17 feet tall. So when you walk in the front door, you're standing about 2.5 feet above ground level and you're on a wooden boardwalk. The boardwalk kind of just meanders its way through the greenhouse. So there's plants and everything on the sides. It's like my best representation of a rainforest. And then as you walk down, you kind of get down the boardwalk. It's hard to see in my videos, but the boardwalk, when you get down towards the pond to the other end of the greenhouse, it's almost like ground level. So it kind of feels like you're walking down into the rainforest. And then in the back side of the pond, we have a big above ground 2,000 gallon monster fish pond. And that's where we keep like our all our South American fish, like peacock bass and arowana and stuff. So yeah, you kind of just the idea is to just make it to where you feel like you're just on a path, kind of wandering through the rainforest.
Yeah, yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, like I said at the beginning, the people, many reptile keepers will have this as a pipe dream, and it really, when you look at what you've done, it's like I'm sure what most people would have envisioned for their own dream. It's really incredible. Can you tell us, if you're comfortable, how much you think you've probably invested money wise into this project?
Yeah, of course. So I'm totally open about all that stuff. But the one thing I will say is I quit keeping track a while ago because it's depressing. It's too much money. But I think if I had to take a guess, I'm roughly about $60,000 into the whole project. But that's everything. That's including the structure. That's probably including plants up to now, which I have a lot of money in plants in there. That's like animals. That's everything. So somewhere around 60,000 so far.
I mean, and I think if anyone has a huge collection, they probably have already spent. Some people have already spent that much, even just on a bunch of enclosures. You know, not just like a few, but maybe if you have like upwards of 100 animals for 10 years or so, you're probably hitting that mark relatively easy. So that's not that unreasonable, I don't think.
No, I agree. I think if you're keeping like 5+ animals long term, it adds up way quicker. Like if you went back and added up everything that everybody spends on the hobby, I think they'd be shocked at how much it actually is.
Oh yeah, I mean, even if I do like a small project here, even if I have an enclosure that's pre-made and I am doing a project of just setting it up, I'll spend easily 800 or $1,000, especially in Canada. All the building materials are so expensive right now, but I'll easily spend $1,000 just buying stuff like silicones and foam and whatever else it is. So that's not just on one animal. So I could see it definitely over time you're spending a lot of money. Do you think that what you've done is replicable? That you can replicate that on a smaller scale? Like it's sort of intimidating doing a 20 by 30 structure in your backyard, but could somebody do it with like maybe they buy one of those ready-made greenhouses from like Home Depot and they want something that's maybe smaller, like an 8 by 6 for a bunch of small lizards, for example. Do you think roughly what you've done can be done on a small scale?
Yeah, I do think so. I think on a little bit smaller scale would actually be easier. There's like a point, right, where too small of a scale would be hard. There's probably like a happy medium, but I bet like 10 by 10 or something like that would be extremely doable. I think it's honestly scalable to any size you want. It's just depending on the resources and time and effort you want to put into it. And then obviously there's a lot of things that change. Like on a smaller scale, if it was 10 by 10, I would have like a couple species in there,
Mhm.
maybe. I wouldn't have like a ton of different cohabbing going on because it's hard to simulate microclimates on a small scale. But as far as just creating the environment and like choosing one type of climate and sticking with it, I think it's totally scalable to any size pretty much. I think like the bigger you go, the more options you go as far as like species and climates you can create. The smaller you go, the less options you have, but still very, very doable.
Did you have a specific area of the world that you initially, like from the get go, that you were trying to replicate, or did that, like, I think maybe we're probably talking about South America species. I assume that's what mostly you have in there. Was that the plan from the get go, or did you kind of did that morph into your vision as you put collected the species and whatnot?
So I started out specifically wanting to be Amazonia because that's kind of where I'm most obsessed with and what I know the most about. But then as time went on, I actually did the opposite and I opened it up to other areas of the world to an extent. It's still mostly Amazonia. But one of my main goals with the greenhouse that I don't talk about a whole ton is I really want to do like educational work in there and I want to do educational tours and stuff. I eventually would like to file a nonprofit and have the time to let people book tours to come there and schools come do tours and stuff. And in the smaller space that I have, like relatively, I think limiting it to one specific area, like just lessens the opportunities to teach people about things. Because I thought about this a lot and I was like, because I would personally like to have one that's one specific region. I'd like to obsess over it and make it like even the types of driftwood I have are from that region, like super specific. But from an educational and like exhibit aspect of it, I just think that limits me too much. I'd rather showcase like just rainforests in general and why those ecosystems are important and the most symbiotic relationships I possibly can and all that. So I originally planned on doing strictly Amazonia, and then as I've built it and as things have gone on, I've kind of loosened it a little bit just to give myself more options. But someday I would love to do multiple bigger greenhouses and I'd love to do like very, very specific regions. I think that would be amazing. But that's like a whole nother high dollar project of its own right there.
Yeah. That's for the future. So why don't we talk about? So let's bring everybody up to speed. You have the structure built. You have the ventilation and the heating working. And you built the boardwalk. I know that was one of the very first things that you did. What was the first part of the inside project? Did you start with the pond or?
Yeah, so I started with the pond very first because I wanted to get like actual structures out of the way. And I had to pour concrete and stuff for the pond and do fiberglass, which I couldn't do with anything else in there. So yeah, I started the pond very first. So we poured a slab, built the pond out of cinder block, fiberglassed it, put like a big viewing window in the front. And then I think the next thing I did was start bringing in dirt because I brought in separate dirt and I made my own soil mix, my own like tropical soil mix. And then I did the boardwalk after that.
How'd you do the soil mix? I just
gosh.
can't imagine how much that must have been.
It was a nightmare. So I did, I found like, I looked at all the different local like topsoil suppliers and I found a topsoil I really liked that just looked really good and it kind of had some pumice and mulch mixed in already. So I did 15 yards of topsoil, which is like a whole dump truck load, just so everybody knows out there. And then I did 5 yards of perlite, 5 yards of peat moss, and that was my initial mix. And we like shoveled it, we hand wheelbarrowed it all into the greenhouse and mixed it by hand, like with shovels so it was like, yeah, like 25 yards of soil just hand mixing in the greenhouse. So that was a nightmare. We did that in like, I think 2 days. I had a couple friends come help me. We knocked it out in like a day and a half, 2 days. So that sucked. And then that's the initial soil mix. And then on top of that, I did mulch, like nice bark mulch on top of that, and then leaf litter on top of that. And that the idea behind that was, and I've done some like natural, like organic fertilizers and stuff mixed in as top dress too. But the reason is I wanted to simulate like the layers of decomposition in the rainforest. So like now, most of the mulch, I honestly need to top off the mulch in there soon because most of it's gone. It doesn't even exist anymore. And then the leaf litter breaks down on top of the mulch. So we have these layers of like the soil, the almost completely decomposed stuff, the like partially decomposed stuff, the starting to decompose stuff, and then the new stuff. So it creates like a lot of habitat for microfauna, which is very important in there. So that's the soil mix. But yeah, that was a nightmare to do. It was fun.
Could an animal, I don't think you have any species in there that could do this, but could an animal theoretically dig its way out of the greenhouse to get outside the external wall, or is there something stopping that?
So we did the geothermal and then we backfilled on top of that, like I said. And our native soil there was like hard packed white clay.
Okay.
It was super, super hard. So it's super, super compacted. And then we put like 3 layers of this super, super thick weed barrier stuff on top of it. So really something would have to dig down like 3 feet or so to even hit the weed barrier. Then it would have to chew through all that and then dig through like rock hard clay and then dig down another 3 feet to get under the foundation and up and out.
Right.
So it's extremely unlikely, but like theoretically it's possible if a bunch of really dedicated rats got at it, they might be able to, but I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah. Okay, so everything's well contained. So you mixed up the soil, and then next was planting, I guess. I don't know if you or did you actually put some fish into the pond before you started doing the plants?
Yeah, those happened around the same time because I was growing out a lot of the fish at home. I had a 150-gallon aquarium first, and they're like arowana and peacock bass, so I bought everything at like 2 inches and I was growing it out, and things were growing out pretty fast. So we got the pond done and ready and all heated and everything like that, let it run for a few months. And then we started putting some of the fish in. I don't know, fish and plants came at about the same time, honestly.
And then what was the first?
So yeah, we started.
Oh no, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you're good. But yeah, so we started putting plants in, kind of leaf litter and just like making it, which looking back on my videos now, I remember I was looking at it and being like, man, it's so natural in here now. I look back on those videos and I'm like, there were 4 stubby little plants. That was not natural at all looking. But yeah, we started doing that. And then as plants kind of started to grow and we started to have some habitat for animals, then that's when we started to add like reptiles and amphibians and, just and stuff. So.
And what did you start with? Was it the dart frogs you initially started with, or what was the first few species you threw in there? If you actually want to see the natural, beautiful colors of your plants and animals in your vivarium, then they need to be lit up by a high-quality lamp, and that is where ZooMed's Reptisun LED hood with sunrise and sunset timer comes in. This lamp has an extremely high, best-in-class color rendering index of 94, which means the natural, vibrant colors of both your plants and animals are going to pop in the Viv, especially those that have red color, whether that's plants or animals. They are going to look incredible under these high-quality LED chips. And of course, the new exciting feature of being able to program a sunrise and a sunset, meaning you can actually gradually increase and decrease the brightness of the light by 10% increments to simulate that slow rise in the morning and slow set in the evening. It is IP65 rated, which means it's perfect for humid environments. And if you're somebody that likes to be efficient with their space, then you'll definitely want to check out the Reptisun LED UVB combo hood. That includes both the LED strip for visible light, as well as programming the 90-minute sunrise or sunset, and a T5 for your UV production that runs on a on-off timer. The hood has aluminum housing for efficient heat transfer and longer life. It has independent timers for both the T5 and the LEDs, and a T5 UVB lamp is also included with the hood. For more information on this or any other ZoomEd product, make sure you head to zoomed.com or check out the link in the show notes or the YouTube description.
But yeah, the dart frogs were the very first species to go in there besides fish. So the thought with that was I couldn't put anything arboreal in there because I had like nothing. It was just barely working on the forest floor. So I had some plants for cover and stuff like that. And then the dart frogs I chose are the Phyllobates terribilis. So they're a very bold dart frog, very easy to feed. So I figured they were kind of like a good test animal, for lack of a better term, just because I would be able to find them fairly easy and feed them and stuff like that. I highly suspected that they would do good in there no matter what, They don't need UV. They're the easiest animal I keep in there. So I just had a good feeling that they would be the good first animal. And really, they're the only like solid terrestrial animal I keep in there. So when I only had small plants growing all over the ground, it made sense to add them first.
But I still can imagine, I mean, those are some pretty small frogs being put into a giant environment. I mean, like you said, you should have success finding them, but did you actually wonder if, like, once you put them into a 20 by 30 thing, it's like, where did they go? Did you have any issues with finding them, or were they always kind of out and about and easy to locate?
So they surprised me. They were great, but I was like super nervous about it. Like the first night I put them in there, I like did not sleep at all. I was like itching for the sun to come up the next morning so I could go. But I was like, also like, I just put these into a huge space. I don't want to bother them and stress them out and make them feel like there's predators in there. So it's like in the back of my mind, I know I need to just leave things alone. Like once I put them in there, the risk is taken, It's not like in a home viv where I can sit there and baby them. So I kind of need to just leave them alone and let them be comfortable and find hiding spots. But like in the back of my mind, I'm going crazy and I want to check on everything. So I was super nervous putting them in there. But no, they did good. Even like as tiny little froglets, I think I think the next day I found them like hopping around, no problem. And they would always come out pretty much when I'd come over there. I would like always see them during the day and stuff. So they've been awesome and they're still that way. So they have never, if anything, I see them less now, but it's just because I have so much more plant cover in there. Like they could be hiding literally under any leaf now, but I still see them pretty much anytime you go over there, even if it's like the worst time of day, you could still find 2 or 3 of them. And I only have 6 in there. So they're pretty easy to find.
That must have been a pretty cool moment, though. Adding them is always exciting, but I'm sure like it's coming back the next day. And anybody has that experience. You get a new animal, you put them in their enclosure, and then typically they hide. And then maybe the next day or two, you start to see them more comfortable, and then that's when you get excited because you can see the animal using whatever you've built. But I imagine walking back into the greenhouse and realizing that you have these little tiny frogs in such a gargantuan space. That must have been, I don't know, maybe I'm putting words into your mouth, but that must have been one of those moments where you're like, wow, I actually did the thing that I was aiming to do. Like I have these little frogs that are basically going to be like wild dart frogs. I mean, in the wild, I'm not sure how big their range is. Maybe some species travel a lot more, but that's a huge space for them, and they're going to act essentially wild in that setting.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like it's super satisfying. But my biggest concern with adding them was getting them to like feed properly, because I was like, they are captive frogs. Like, I don't know what it takes for a frog to learn how to be wild and learn how to like eat and stuff. So are they only going to come to bright white dusted fruit flies? Or are they going to be able to find food on their own? Because that's another thing to mention. The greenhouse, like that mulch layer holds just all kinds of microfauna. So there's like the dart frogs to this day. I feed them and supplement them every now and then, but for the most part, I don't really feed them. They just eat on their own. So the most like satisfying part where I was like, okay, I did it. I think I can call this a success for now at least, was like 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, when they started getting fat. Like I was like trying to feed them, but one or two would get the fruit flies. I wouldn't be able to find the other ones, or the fruit flies would just disperse by the time they got anywhere close to them. And then seeing after 2 or 3 weeks that even though I felt like I was like kind of failing at feeding them, they were like getting fatter, like way fat, like pretty much like obese little froglets. So I was like, okay, things are going good. So that's like the first big step out of the way, making sure they're kind of eating on their own and doing good. So that was when things got really exciting, just watching them get fat and grow.
Did you add microfauna to the soil, or did you just have whatever naturally has made its way in there?
Both. So there's a lot, probably the majority of the stuff is just like native stuff that's made its way in. But I did add like a few different species of springtails and isopods and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I mean, obviously there's lots of native isopods, or like centipedes is another one that ends up in all my enclosures. I feel like, even though I never introduced them, or maybe they're not centipedes, millipedes, and those sort of things. It's just they just grow. I mean, especially because yours technically they could have just been in the soil, and there could have been eggs in the soil, and then suddenly there's warmth, and then there you go. So, and you know that the microfauna is going to be successful there because that's sort of where they're from.
Yep. And there's even like, this is kind of a total side tangent, but like I found like ants in the greenhouse. I don't get like tons of them. I don't get big ant hills or enough to where it's a problem. But the dart frogs love eating ants. And like I suspect most dart frogs probably eat a large percentage of ants in the wild. So it's really cool to see them being able to eat ants, which is something we don't typically offer them in captivity. And I have a couple ant ferns, like little ant plants that are mounted on stuff around the greenhouse that have a relationship with ants in the wild, where the ants live inside the tunnels, inside the fern's rhizome. And I have actually found a native species of ant that somebody on Instagram ID'd for me. I can't remember the name though, so don't quote me on it right now. But I actually have a native species of ant that has taken up home in all those ant ferns. And now I see those ants all over the greenhouse. And I think they're like a main food source for the dart frogs. So that's been really cool to see.
That
Because
is
I like,
amazing.
obviously, I think adding cool tropical ants or something in there would be awesome, but that's very like unethical and risking them getting out into the wild in my native area. So I can't do that. But seeing native ants take up that role has been really cool. It's like a win-win.
Yeah, that's fascinating, especially because they obviously in Utah there's not that specific plant that they sort of naturally use. So it's pretty incredible that they eventually found that niche to fill, that their tropical cousins fill in the wild. That's fascinating. And as far as plants, can you run through some of the plants? Because now when you look at the greenhouse, there's some big like hardy plants in there, and like you said, when you first started there was only a couple, and now it's looking like pretty full. So what do you have growing in there right now?
Yeah, so I have all kinds of tropical plants. I'm mostly into like cool little epiphytes and stuff like that. But I have like the greenhouse started by I knew I needed to fill space quickly and create habitat. So I put a bunch of large aroids in there, like lots of anthuriums and monstera and philodendrons and stuff like that, just all kinds of different varieties of them. And then now that things are grown in, I'm kind of transitioning into what I want it to eventually be and what looks more like a natural rainforest to me. So I'm taking out some of the big, huge leaf, super fast growing plants, and I'm replacing them with more obscure, slower growing plants like certain palm species and like little epiphytes that climb and take forever to really fill a space. So I have, yeah, I don't know, like everything you could imagine, all kinds of epiphytic ferns, orchids, anthuriums, philodendrons. I've been getting into cool, like rare tropical trees and stuff lately, like some cooler small varieties of palm trees and then some rare rainforest trees. Like I just got a Syzygium juhoi, which is like my favorite tree on this earth, and I've been looking for one for 2 years. So fingers crossed that that thing does good in there. But so slowly replacing the common like fast plants with slower growing plants that'll be really cool 3 or 4 years from now. But yeah, I got kind of everything, like little vivarium plants and stuff. I'm really into like details and like small plants. One of the goals in the greenhouse with animals and plants was to make it to where if you come over and spend 2 hours there, 5 different times, you will see something different every single time you come over. So I'm
That's
like
cool.
really detail oriented. I like all the little tiny plants hidden everywhere that you don't notice on your first trip over there. And then kind of the same way with the animals. I like to have some super bold animals you see all the time, and then some that are kind of a hidden little treat that you don't see as much unless you know where to look.
Yeah, and if you did have a video on, I think a two-part video on YouTube of going through a bunch of the plants. So people really want to get into the nitty gritty, they can check that out because you go through things as well on there. Oh, there was something. Oh, yeah. As far as the plants and their ability to grow and their health, do you find that you're having a lot of success growing? Like, do you struggle with plant growth in general, or is it in most of the time you're basically hitting slam dunks?
So there's obviously been like some struggles with plant growth, but it's been way better than I expected. I expected plants and plant health to be like a major issue in the greenhouse that I was going to have to work through as I became a better horticulturist, you know? But really, I think this has proven to me that just creating the proper environment, plants will do good on their own for the most part. But that being said, I'm not like I have some house plants at home, right? We're like super picky about them. We keep them all perfect and pretty looking. I'm not that way with the greenhouse because I am trying to replicate a natural rainforest. And in rainforest, plants look like hell. They look
Hmm.
beat. Like most of them do not look nearly as healthy as any of our vivariums. Every old leaf you see is yellowing around the edge and dying. Only the new emergent growth even looks healthy in half of the rainforests, you know? So I'm not worried about things being absolutely perfect. And one thing is I have had a lot of pest issues in the greenhouse, but I don't know how to explain it. It's almost like the plants in the greenhouse just grow stronger, so they're more resistant to the pests. So like some plants get a small amount of pest damage, but it doesn't make the overall plant look bad or unhealthy or anything. And they, for the most part, if I leave things alone, things kind of like find their balance. Like I'll have an outbreak of one pest, and then I do battle pests a little bit with biological control, like with other insects that prey on those pests. So I constantly am adding new insects to the greenhouse to battle pests, but I've never like I've had a couple outbreaks that were like getting pretty bad to where I was getting concerned, like, okay, plants are going to start looking bad. And then as soon as I start getting really concerned, things kind of just find their own balance somehow. So I think as long as I'm not worried about keeping everything like perfect, then things do kind of like balance themselves out and overall plant health is really good. But there is something interesting, like if I add a new plant from one of my vivariums or from that's been grown in a house before, a lot of times uh, it'll look really bad at first. Like it'll get its leaves that it has currently will get wrecked by like pest damage, like whitefly damage or something like that. And then as soon as it starts putting out new growth, that growth is doesn't get affected. So it's almost like the plants that I've grown like under artificial lighting are weaker somehow, and they just don't deal with it as well. But then when I get plants from other people that grow in greenhouses or from like imported plants from other places, they tend to do a lot better just right off the bat because I think they're used to being in a similar environment. I don't know if it's the natural sunlight or what it is, but the plants definitely grow stronger in there and are more resistant to it than like my normal house plants would be.
Well, that's kind of what I suspected. Like, I would have been surprised if you said that you struggled with plants, just because I suspect it's probably the humidity and the temperature that just allows those plants, maybe not the temperature as much, but the humidity in the air, keeping these, because they're rainforest plants, they're tropical plants, and we all keep tropical plants inside. Like right now, it's 27% humidity in my basement, and my basement has a higher humidity than the rest of my house because it's in a basement. So, the tropical plants really aren't designed for this. And then you have them in your vivariums underneath a halogen bulb, and it's a lot of dry air. Even if you are trying to maintain a more humid system inside a viv, it's not like it's 80% and all the time, unless you happen to live in a humid place. But I find that really fascinating. And like you said, it's when you give the plants the tools they need to thrive, those pests actually aren't as much of an issue as we see them in our captive environments. Like I have mealy bugs that pop up in these vivs, and they're the most annoying pest because they're so hard to get rid of, and they really do suck the life out of plants. And that's just a really fascinating insight.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Mealy bugs are one that I was worried about having big problems with in the greenhouse because I've heard, and I know from like I know a lot of zookeepers that have problems with them in massive enclosures. And I don't know what it is about the greenhouse, but I do not have, I've had a couple minor mealybug outbreaks on specific plants, but they have never spread to other plants. And then eventually they go away on their own. I've done nothing about it besides add like the beneficial insects that I have and stuff. But the mealybugs, for some reason, just do not thrive in the greenhouse, which I am very happy for.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, I have had other things. And one thing to mention too with the pests is I don't think they're all necessarily a bad thing in the greenhouse. Like right now, I have white flies. It's basically, I'm pretty sure it's just going to be a wintertime occurrence no matter what. Because wintertime is when all the pests come into the greenhouse. It's like the only place left for them to live, you know, so they find their way in. And then the wintertime, the greenhouse is also super, super wet. So that's when most of the pests do really good without drying out at all. And so right now I have white flies fairly bad. They're probably the most dominant pest I have at the moment. But I've realized that dart frogs absolutely love the white flies. Like the areas where the white fly pests are the most prominent is where my like main dominant dart frogs hang out the most, and they are obese now. Like they are the fattest they have ever been over this winter. So said some if I'm trying to replicate a ecosystem, I got to take the good with the bad, you know. I can't only replicate the pretty parts of it. I think that's kind of part of it that a lot of people need to understand too, is like doing something on a large scale, you're kind of giving up some control. You have to understand that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're not going to be able to. Yeah, that's a perfect way to say it. You're definitely going to be giving up a lot of control because now there's a lot of variables that just make their way into the enclosures or into the system that you can't stop. One question I want to kind of go back to what we're talking about expense, and then I definitely want to talk about the animals. But do you have a rough idea of how much you spend monthly just on maintenance? Not even, I don't even mean animal maintenance. I just mean more like the electrical bill or anything like that that's running the greenhouse. I'm sure you've seen a spike in your own energy use. So do you kind of have an idea of how much you're spending on it?
Yeah, so anywhere from it's hard because it just changes so much depending on what's going on at the time. And I'm still constantly working on the greenhouse too. So it's not like it's completed and I'm just maintaining it. Like
Right.
pretty much any given month, I'm doing something to it still. But I would say, as far as just maintaining it, if I had to take a guess, I would say anywhere from like 200 to like 400 a month.
Okay.
So like right now in the wintertime, this is like the coldest time of year. Well, not today, but typically it's like the coldest time of year. The heating bill will be up to like 250 to 350 a month. But that's for like 1 or 2 months out of the year. During the summer, the utility bill is like 100 or less because it barely makes a difference on the electricity here. And then my main source of heat is with natural gas heater, which luckily we have pretty cheap natural gas here in Utah where I live. So that's way more efficient than heating electrically. If I had to heat with an electric heater, I don't know if I could afford to do it. It'd probably be very, very expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
And then other than that, I just have like fish food and like I said, beneficial insects for the greenhouse here and there. And every now and then I got to buy some more leaf litter to put in or something like that. So yeah, I would say like 2 to 400 a month,
Okay.
sometimes up to like 700 a month, just depending if I'm doing a lot of stuff, sometimes down to like 200 if I'm just in the summertime, it's not running the heater a lot and I'm just basically feeding the fish, you know?
So back to the animals, you have the pond stocked, you have the dart frogs jumping around. What was the next thing that you decided to add into the ecosystem?
Man, this is crazy that I actually have to think about this. It's been a while now. Things have been in here for a little bit. Okay, so the next thing was tree frogs. So the very next thing to go in was my blue-webbed gliding frogs, the Rhacophorus renoirtii. So I got a group of them and I added them in. So I figured the next easiest thing is probably tree frogs, you know, once I started getting more plants growing in and everything. It seems like, and I don't want to say this and give people the wrong idea, but in general, amphibians, if you have the proper setup, are more easy to care for because they don't require special lighting and all this stuff. And they have fairly slow metabolisms compared to like lizards and stuff. So they're much easier to monitor their food levels and make sure they're holding weight properly and eating and finding food and stuff. So yeah, the next thing I added was the blue web gliding frogs, and they did the same thing. They did awesome. I kept them, I had them at home for I think almost 3 months, quarantining them and stuff because they were wild caught ones. And then I added them to the greenhouse and they all instantly within a week just plumped up. They just all got huge. And
Wow.
I was worried I would never be able to see them because they're nocturnal. But during the day, I can usually find at least a couple of them sitting on a leaf somewhere, which is pretty surprising. And then if you go over there at night and shine around with a flashlight, you can usually find a handful of them, which is really cool.
That's amazing. And then what came after that?
So then next was I felt like things had been going good. It'd probably been 6 months had gone by, maybe even more, but I'd had
Okay, so you just
animals
ran it
living in
with
there for
just
quite a while.
you ran it with just the frogs for about 6 months.
Yeah, probably somewhere around there. I might be off by a month or two, but yeah, no, I did things very slowly in there, because this is a giant experiment, for lack of a better term, but like that's the reality of it. It is a big experiment, and I'm experimenting with living things. So I didn't feel like it was the responsible thing to just say like, okay, we succeeded and throw a bunch of crap in there. And I was
Yeah.
also waiting for plants to grow and create more habitat because that's one question I get a lot is like with cohabbing, do I have aggression issues and stuff like that? And I think if I threw everything in there right off the bat, I probably would have. But as habitat opened itself up and I kind of noticed, hey, there's this niche not being used, I think it's time for an animal that fills that niche. But anyways, the next thing I threw in the tree frogs. So the dart frogs and then the tree frogs. And then I put some emerald skinks in there. So this is where I got some of the Asia added in there.
Mm.
Kind of broke off from the South America theme. And I put some emerald tree skinks in there. And that was like my first test with lizards, which I was really nervous for them too, because I was nervous, one, that they would go down to the ground and eat the dart frogs. Because the dart frogs were still fairly small at that point. And then I was worried about just like UV and them eating, because lizards just in general have like such a higher metabolism. They eat so much more than frogs and stuff that like those were the real test of like, are the animals in here going to just completely deplete the food source? They're going to do great for 3 weeks and then just starve. Like, but no, I put the emerald skinks in there and they did really good. Everybody talks about emerald skinks because they're like the most personable lizard in the world. And I'm just going to say in the greenhouse, they are not. They're the least personable and they hate humans and they hide. So you don't see them very much anymore. I still see them quite often, but you see them for about 15 seconds and then they notice you're staring at them and they disappear for the next 5 days. So they're the most shy animal I've added in there.
Well, and as the owner of even that you can do this with a vivarium, you become extremely good at noticing your animal in the enclosure, even if it's like half a toe sticking out. Like I hate when people come over and I'm like, I can see it, but you're never gonna see it. I don't even want to have you stand here in the enclosure to try to find this thing because I can see where this gecko is, but you'll just never see it. And so I can imagine that you probably have a really good eye. Plus, you know where to look for these certain things. So were you feeding and adding feeder insects for the emerald skinks, or were they just fully hunting on their own and eating what they found?
Yeah, so when I put the emerald skinks in there, I did like religiously add like crickets and dubias and just different types of worms and stuff for a while. And I after a while I kind of cut back on it. Like I got to a point this summer. It's not really there now. I need to start topping up on it again. But I got to the point this summer where black soldier flies were just breeding pretty readily in the greenhouse. Like I got to the point where I had clouds of them at any given time, and I kind of added more in a few months. And I figured out the emerald tree skinks love the black soldier flies, like the actual flies. They go absolutely crazy chasing them, which is great because they're super high in calcium and stuff. They're like a great food source. But so for a while, I kind of slowed down on feeding them. And then recently, I've gotten some more polychris, which we can talk about those in a minute. But I've gotten more from Roy, and I've noticed I'm finally hitting the limit to where now I do have to feed consistently. If not, things do start to lose weight.
Okay, so you're just
But
throwing
that
some
only
stuff in.
happened with the polychris.
Okay,
So with the emerald skinks and stuff, things were just doing good on their own for like quite a long time, probably 6 months or so. I did feed probably once a month or so, but I could have like gone without it.
that's amazing. That's really cool. And then was it the polychris? Is that what you got next, or was there a few more things between?
So I think I got the emerald skinks, and then I added after them a second type of tree frog. I added red-eyed tree frogs because you got to have just the classic tree frog in there. And
Absolutely.
then after that, from Mike Titula, shout out Mike, I got some Tachydromus. So he sent me
Mm.
some Tachydromus smaragdinus. So I have a group of them in there as well. And then I added the Polychrus, the first Polychrus, I had just one lone male Polychrus that Roy donated to me. So shout out Roy. And I added the Spilotes were the last thing.
And that was from Roy as well.
Yep. And that was at the same time. I got the first Polychrus and the Spilotes all together.
Okay. As you were kind of picking the species, and you have, with Mike and Roy, you have real good guidance from those guys, but were you had kind of mentioned that you were looking for different niches in the greenhouse to fill. Were you looking at anything else to give yourself comfort that they would be able to cohab with what was already in there? Or were you just thinking like they have a niche, they theoretically shouldn't eat each other? I mean, we'll talk about the Spilotes in a second because I think that would maybe be the biggest risk potentially, and I'm not sure if it has been or not, but how are you kind of playing that game of thinking about like, is this going to work?
Yeah, so it's just, and this is the thing I say with just cohabbing in general, because people like assume I'm a massive like advocate for cohabbing because I'm doing it on a massive scale, But I do think cohabbing is okay, but it just has to be really, really well thought out. Like the environment created for the animals has to be good and things have to be really well thought out. So that was like, so say I added the dart frogs, right? The first thing I added was a terrestrial diurnal frog. The next thing I added was a nocturnal arboreal frog. I had a very, I was like 90% sure that they would never interact with each other, like why would they in that big of a space? Why would like the tree frog comes down to the ground at night, maybe, but it's the dart frog's gonna be sleeping somewhere. So like just things like that kind of, and I had to like really think about them. Like I said, the first big like the thing that made me nervous was the emerald tree skinks. Because I was like, man, they are diurnal. The dart frogs are also diurnal. The emerald tree skinks are mostly arboreal, but they will go on the ground. And they are just about big enough that they could eat one of the smaller frogs if they really felt motivated to. So I was kind of nervous about that, but I just thought about it and thought about it, and I just highly suspected they would have no reason to have a negative interaction with each other, especially if there's ample amounts of food in there. And this is a kind of a funny story. So literally the day I released the emerald skinks, I have one dart frog that's older than the rest and bigger than the rest. His name's Frogbert. He's kind of like the mascot of the greenhouse. And he has this one little spot where he was always hanging out. And I released the emerald skink onto the tree, right? Hoping it goes up in the tree. Boom, it runs down the tree and darts over to the exact hiding spot where Frogbert hangs out. And I was like, no, this is like what I was scared of. And Frogbert, little Terribilis that still thinks he's the most poisonous thing on this planet, he jumped out and literally jumped right on the skink's nose, and the skink turned and booked it. And then I never ever saw them interact ever again. So I was like, okay, I think we're okay.
That's
the dart
awesome.
frogs actually hold their own. They're bold enough that they can scare things off. So, but no, just I don't know how to explain it, but things just really do need to be thought about when cohabbing. And then you have to really understand not just the animal's care, like looking up care sheets is great and all, but you need to understand like how it behaves in its native range to feel comfortable putting it with other things that fill those same niches. But I've tried to create microclimates and kind of give things their own like respected microclimates. So I'm not like putting tons of arboreal lizards that are all the same size in there. Like if I have 6 species of arboreal lizards that are similar sizes, they're probably going to fight and have some problems. So just try to kind of spread things out over all the different niches and microclimates as much as possible.
And do you see them interacting with each other at all, other than that one, the stare down with the Terribilis? Do you see? Does it seem like each species essentially keeps to their own?
Yeah, like surprisingly so. Like I suspected things would, but I thought there might be like mild negative interactions periodically, but there's enough space to where as soon as something feels stressed and uncomfortable, it can leave the situation. Because that's a problem in our vivs at home, right? Is you're putting things in there, and even if it's a 3 or 4 foot viv, that still is a small space relatively in the wild. So like if things in the wild got in a fight, they would leave way further than 3 or 4 feet from each other. So that was my thought is in the greenhouse, there's enough space and enough habitat and hiding spots and basking spots that things don't have to compete for resources. And so far that's proven out like really, really well. So I don't really see very much, if any, like interspecies behavior, like at all, really. Like things just don't really mess with each other. The one thing is the big, huge tree fern you see that I have in the greenhouse. I have this massive, like 12-foot diameter tree fern in there. And that's where the majority of my polychris like to hang out. And I also have two tachydermis that love that tree fern. They're basically those, at least these two polychris that I have, and then those two tachydermis are always in that tree fern. They never leave it. And they will hang out like 3 inches from each other. And they just don't care at all. They don't
Interesting.
interact. They don't bother each other at all, but they don't seem to be scared of each other at all either, which is weird because the tachydermis are like tiny compared to the polychris. So that was
Yeah,
one of the
yeah.
comments I got when I added the polychris was that the tachydermis were gone. They were getting eaten. That was like a criticism I got a lot. And they do not seem to bother each other even in the slightest.
Well, then there's also the speed. I feel like tachydermis may be a little fast. I've never seen a polychris in person, so I just feel like they're maybe a slower moving animal compared to the tachydermis. They're quite quick
Yeah.
and swift, and they zip around pretty easily. Now I just thought of this. Is with the pond? Do you have a cover on there? Like, are you worried about any animals falling in and drowning?
Yeah. So I have a big like screen enclosure that goes all the way over the pond. In my videos, it doesn't look like it, but it's because it's kind of like a garage door. The whole front of it opens up automatically. So when I'm over there filming videos or I'm feeding fish and stuff, I open it up. But the rest of the time it's closed and it's covered in like 1/4 inch mesh. So
Mhm.
really nothing can go into the pond because that is one thing. If things go in the water, they're going to get eaten. The fish
For
are
sure. Yeah.
absolute monsters. They're the meanest ones in the greenhouse for sure. The only thing is the tachydermis are so small and skinny. I can't possibly like tachydermis proof everything. And I don't know for sure, but I know I originally started with, I think, 6 tachydermis. And I know I only consistently see 3 anymore. And the only thing I could think is there was 2 that always hung out on the back side of the pond, kind of like on the
Mhm.
mesh. And I like do wonder sometimes if some of them decided to go for a swim and did not make it because I don't see those ones hanging out by the pond at all anymore. And then it seems like all the ones that took up residence by the fern and everything have stuck around and done really good. So, or it's hard too because plants have grown in so much that like finding a tachydermis that big, is like could
Yeah.
be impossible. It could just be up in the tree somewhere where I'm never, ever, ever going to see it. But I don't know for sure. But I think there is a chance that tachydermis got eaten by fish, one or two of them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that, like you said, that's just the sort of the occupational hazard of doing an experiment like this. And theoretically, maybe these animals will breed in that space at some point in the future as well. Do the frogs call at all? Like, I just think about your neighbors, and if you have some loud tree frogs calling at night, are they like, what the hell's going on over there?
Yeah. So luckily all the neighbors know about the greenhouse. They're all cool with it. They all love it. Think it's awesome. But yeah, the pretty much all the frogs, so the tree frogs, the blue web gliding frogs, and the red eyes, as soon as I put them in there, they started calling. Like they called way more than they did when I kept them at home because both of them I kept at home before. The red eyes I'd had at home for a couple years before I put them in the greenhouse. And you can still hear them call some nights, and you can hear the blue webs call. It's weird. The red eyes, I've noticed they'll come out like right when it starts getting dark and getting really active. The blue webs won't come out until like after midnight, and then they'll call all the way until the sun's coming up in the morning. But the blue webs make a really weird call. It almost sounds like kind of like the grudge, like that weird creaky noise, and then mixed with tapping on glass. So it is
Oh,
actually like the
creepy.
blue webs make a very creepy noise, and they're pretty loud too. Like you can hear them from like the side of the property, like the side of the house. You can hear them calling pretty well. Or if you're like inside the house in the kitchen with the window open or something, you can hear them pretty good.
Yeah, that's cool. Have you thought of adding any birds to that? Like little birds into the greenhouse. I mean, I'm sure this would become snake food, but that's what, when you walk into like a big zoo exhibit, like one of those giant greenhouses, there's always birds flying around, and I just feel like it's a big enough space where you could do it, except for they could become peacock bass food or Spilotes food.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was my original plan was to add some birds. So I originally just wanted to add some small little birds, like some tanagers and finches and stuff like that. And then as time went on, my ideas changed and I decided I wanted to add a RSRI. Instead of a lot of small birds, I just wanted to add one curl-crested RSRI, which is like a miniature toucan, basically. They're really cool birds because obviously I don't want to add like parrots or anything that are destructive and super loud and would cause problems. But since then, I've met like a couple people, like one of my friends, Parker. He's a horticulturist at a local aviary and runs a tropical exhibit. And he's the main person, but there's been a couple other people that have basically convinced me that birds and small reptiles just don't get along good. So even very peaceful birds seem like they will pick on small lizards and stuff, and like sometimes not even eat them, just kill them just to kill them.
Mm.
So that's why I wanted to go with the RSREs. I figured they're a frugivore, and they eat some insects and stuff. But I've since heard from some people that have kept RSREs that they do bully small lizards and stuff. And then as far as plants go, even small peaceful birds are just super destructive to plants. So like Parker, my friend that's a horticulturist at the aviary, he's like birds are like the bane of his existence, which is funny because he works at an aviary, but he can't have like any cool plants in there because the birds just destroy everything. So I did originally plan on doing birds, and I still would really, really like to, but I just don't think it's feasible. I originally planned on doing birds and not snakes. I didn't want to do any snakes at all. And then kind of as I like lost hope on the bird idea and realized it just might not be, maybe on a bigger, even bigger scale, I think it would really be possible. But in my scale, I still think it's pretty risky. And then, yeah, so as I kind of lost hope on the birds thing, I ended up gaining hope on the snake thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the problem
Roy
now. If I
got
do
you
a bird
hooked.
that's big enough, it's not gonna, yeah, yeah, he did. But if I do a bird that's big enough, it's not gonna cause problems. It'll cause some sort of damage or destruction or problems. And then if I do birds small enough, which turns out they still cause problems, but then they're going to end up being snake food most likely. So
Mm.
birds
Yeah,
are
so
probably off the table for now, unfortunately.
yeah, it's one of those things where you got to think about the pros and the cons, and that might be tilted too far into the cons direction for it to make sense. So let's talk about the decision to get the snake, the Spilotes, the puffing snakes. This is a species that does get very large. I think you got the one that you got quite small from Roy. And so what pushed you into the edge of deciding, yeah, let's add a snake to this environment? And did you have some fears about that? And how's it going? If you are a regular listener to the podcast and you want to help support the production of the show, make sure you head to patreon.com/animalsathome. For as little as $3 per month, you can help me pay for the service fees that go along with editing and producing the show. And for as little as $5 a month, you have early access to the episodes. Thank you very much for your support. Enjoy the podcast.
So Roy is what pushed me. No, I'm just kidding. But no, so I didn't want to add snakes because I'm a big snake person. Like I probably enjoy the natural behavior of snakes more than any other reptile. I love everything, but snakes are definitely my main jam. So everybody always asks me, like, am I going to do snakes in the greenhouse? And I just always said no because I didn't find a species that was realistic, I think. Like anything that wasn't going to eat other things and cause problems was going to be a very difficult species to care for there. Like everybody's telling me to get like snail eaters or slug eaters and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not going to be able to make sure those are eating. I'm probably not going to be able to find them most of the time. Like there's so many like the snakes eating other things and being a threat is the least of my concerns, right? Like me being able to properly care for the snake is a big, big concern. And then any big snakes that are easy to care for are going to eat most things in there. So it's like this hard thing where I just was convinced I wasn't going to add snakes because I didn't see that there was one that would be a good fit. And then one day I was looking into the Spilotes and on Roy's page and stuff, and I was just like, man, this would be awesome. And I kind of like, I can't remember what I said, but I commented on one of his posts, like kind of just fishing, And I was like, oh, this is really cool, And he like immediately messaged me and it was like, no pressure at all, but I'm just saying these would be an awesome choice in the greenhouse, And I was like, no, probably not going to happen, but would be super awesome. Send me all the information you have on them. And then me and him just talked back and forth. I thought about it it literally kept me up at night. Like I obsessed over it because the idea of having a big like tropical colubrid in there was so, so cool to me. But I spent like 2 months trying to convince myself that it was a bad idea, and I just couldn't. Like after all the research I did on them, everything from Roy's experience and stuff, I couldn't find a reason why it wouldn't work. So I guess that's a good way to put it with all the animals in general. I kind of research things backwards. I fall in love with something, I want it in there, and then I research trying to find reasons it won't work. And as soon as I find one, then it's off the list, and I'm sad for a little while. But I tried to do that with the Spilotes. I just like obsessed over it. And then the more and more I thought about it, the more realistic it seemed. And one of the big things that convinced me too is I came to the conclusion that I didn't think like it was a risk, but I thought there's a really, really good chance that it would be successful. And part of that is with Roy keeping his how he did, you know. Without him doing that, I don't think I ever would have had the balls to try it. But and then I also got to thinking that I want to do educational stuff in the greenhouse. And one of the like most mistreated animals in the world is snakes, you know, and there's so many people that are scared of them. And I think like we all want to get these pet snakes and then go show people them and make them hold them and stuff like that to help people get over their fears. But that only helps a certain amount of people that are really open-minded to it. I think having snakes in the greenhouse is like a whole new level to it to people because I can convince people to come to the greenhouse even if they're snakes, even if they hate snakes, just because the greenhouse is so cool. They'll like tough it out, you know. But then they come over and they see this 9 foot tropical colubrid and they realize he's hanging out 12 feet up in a tree and he wants nothing to do with you. And if I didn't point you out to him, you wouldn't even see him. And then you can like that's a good chance to educate people on like that's how snakes are in the wild. Snakes don't like come smelling up to you. They're not like mammals. They don't want anything to do with you. They're just super chill, doing their own thing. And I think that like can kind of help people get over their fear and like open the doors for education about snakes in a way that I've never been able to keeping snakes captively before. So that idea also like really pushed me over the edge and super like got me intrigued in having snakes in the greenhouse.
Because Roy does cohab them with the polychris, right? Yeah, okay, so you're already confident that they weren't going to prey on them, and they're not really reptile eaters, I guess, in the wild anyway, I don't think. So that was probably safe in that regard.
Yeah, my thought was that if he cohabs them with the polychris, that like the polychris are the perfect size lizard for them to eat. They're not like super fast. Like if they're not eating the polychris, I don't think they're going to eat other faster, more difficult to catch lizards, you know? So that was a big thing. And then my other concern was, well, maybe they eat tree frogs, you know, maybe they're very good at hunting tree frogs. But I'm like, I have such a big space with so much habitat, and the tree frogs hide so well during the day. Unless they can find them purely based off smell, I don't think they're even going to be able to find them. And the splodies are like purely diurnal, like 100% diurnal. They do not come out at night at all. So I was like, okay, so that kind of works out. But since having them, I will say, uh, like none of my worries have come to fruition, you know, like they've been great. I've
Do you
seen
have
them
two?
go like, yeah, I have two. I got a pair of them from Roy.
Oh, okay.
So I have two. I will say though, I have not seen the female in quite a while. So I went on my trip to Suriname and I have not seen her since I come back. And I've talked to Roy about this a little bit, but I think I've really been hoping that she'll just surface one of these days. But I think the reality is that something happened to the female. I don't know what. I haven't found like a body or remains or anything. So it's been really hard because I don't know what happened. But we've kind of come to the conclusion that something must have happened, some sort of injury, or she got stuck somewhere because she was doing perfectly fine, healthy eating. She was super active. And then just all of a sudden one day, never saw her again. And I know people's mind first goes to like she escaped the greenhouse, but I'm telling you guys, I double check it constantly. The greenhouse is absolutely escape proof, especially for like one of the bigger animals like that. So
Yeah.
if she escaped the greenhouse, then I'd have no tachydramus or emerald skinks left either.
Yeah,
But yeah,
exactly.
so I don't know what happened to her, but that's been a super bummer. I've been kind of like not accepting the fact that it completely happened yet because I've been just hoping that she'll show face sometime or randomly show up. But I think it's been long enough that it's kind of time to just realize that she's probably not in there, unfortunately, but I still have the big male in there.
Well, you do never know because as you know, snakes can pop up a year later after coming out of a hole type thing. But that's the one of the, I guess this is a positive of having such a what's the word, like robust ecosystem in the greenhouse, is that if something does die, it's going to decompose and be consumed by the cleanup crew and all that, whatever else, probably relatively quickly. So if you were gone for a few weeks, you may not actually notice like a smell or something dead. It just may have become part of the greenhouse essentially.
Yep. And that's what I kept thinking that like I would have at least smelt her or found her or something. But I'm like, in reality, things could be covered up and disappeared so fast in there. Like, I bet you if I put a rat out and left it, I bet you the next day it would be like completely gone. So,
Yeah, yeah. So tell me about how you're keeping the snake. Like how do you feed it? Do you go with do you go find him and tongue feed him a rat? I know I've seen you hand feed him a quail egg, which is really cool as well. I think that's something that Roy had taught those animals, or at least the male, before before he sent him to you, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But how are you making sure he's fed?
So that was another thing that made me want the Splodes, or make me think that they would be a good option, as they are just such bold snakes. So they're super diurnal, which is great because I'm also super diurnal. But they're just so bold. They're such good eaters. Like they really don't seem to be picky eaters. After talking to Roy, he was like, never has issues feeding them, you know. And they're always super active. They don't really hide a whole lot. They're usually like, even when they're in hiding, they're still in the tree or somewhere where I can see them. And they're super food motivated. They eat super well. So most of the time I just go in and tongue feed him or hand feed him some eggs, or I'll tongue feed him like chicks and rodents and stuff like that. Sometimes if I like know he's hiding, or say I'm like really in a hurry, I'm stopping by the greenhouse for 10 minutes, I'll just leave something out like sitting on a branch. Like I'll just hang a rat on top of a branch where I know he hangs out a lot. And so far he'll always come out within like 10 minutes and eat it. But I don't feed them on like a strict routine schedule. I just feed them when I notice they're acting hungry again. You know what I mean? So if he's not out and about and he's just been hiding for a few days, I might go 2 weeks without feeding him, you know? And then all of a sudden he'll go into shed and I'll be like, okay, that makes sense. That's why. And then when he gets out of shed, I know he's going to be on a rampage breaking all my plants. So I better like get over there and feed him pretty quickly, you know? So I kind of just like pay really close attention to their behavior, because I go over there every single day. I spend at least an hour at the greenhouse every day. On the weekends, I spend all my time over there basically. So I pay a lot. I try to be as present as much as possible and pay a lot of attention to the animals' behaviors. And then I like feed them based off that. But the big male that's in there, he makes it, when he's ready to eat again, it's very apparent and it's not difficult to feed him at all. He'll come to the food.
Yeah, like I just think like right now my boas are kind of at the end of their winter fast, and so when I'm walking past their enclosures or whatever, they're like following me, and they know that it's almost time to eat. And I just imagine, like, will he come to you? Like, will he come find you if he's hungry?
He'll start like perching in aggressive ways. Like,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's funny. He'll be up in the tree. I'll come in and he's smart. He knows like I'm the feeder, you know? So usually I can see him, like if he's real hungry, like say it's been a while since he ate and he just got out of shed. That's like when he's his hungriest. He'll go hunt. So I'll watch him go around the greenhouse and you can watch him smell, poke his nose in a hole, smell, poke his nose over here, and then move on. Smell, poke his nose. So you can tell that's like hunting behavior. So if he's like that and I'm in there, if I just get anywhere close to him with a rat, he'll smell it and come over and get it. Um, if he's not being quite so aggressive, like he's just getting regular hungry, I notice like he'll be up in the tree and then I'll come in the greenhouse. I'll be working on stuff, filming videos. And next thing you know, I'm like, he's 4 feet closer to me, but he's like hanging down out of the tree, you know, looking in my direction. And then I go to the other side of the boardwalk, to the other side of the tree, and he'll like slowly make his way over there and then he'll perch over there. So it's like almost like him begging for food, you know. He's like, all right, buddy, you know what time it is. So no, he
Yeah.
makes it, yeah, makes it very apparent and it's time to eat. But that's one great thing about them. If I got a like super shy snake, or lots of people said I should get like more fossorial snakes and stuff. And I'm like, one, there's not really much benefit of having a fossorial snake because we'd never get to see it or enjoy it or teach people about it, you know? And then just me making sure it's eating and healthy and finding it every time I got to feed it would be a nightmare. I don't think I could properly take care of it, you know? So the Splodies really are like the perfect snake. I cannot, still to this day, cannot think of a better fit for the greenhouse just because they're so bold and active and just, yeah, they're just super active snakes.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. It's such an incredible project, and I just love watching your videos and the stuff you post on Instagram. And like I said, it's everybody's dream, and you've like legitimately accomplished it. And it seems like it's just going to continue to go. I would love to wrap up with, you'd already mentioned your trip to Suriname, and I'm curious, maybe you could just tell me a little bit about the trip, how long you guys were there for, and but I'm especially curious because I'm sure when you went there, you were probably looking at everything through the lens of your greenhouse, and I'd be curious to know if there's anything that you brought back that you're like, I need to change this, and you know, is there anything you learned from being in the legitimate rainforest? So tell us about the trip. How long were you there, and where were you specifically?
Yeah, so we were in Suriname, which a lot of people don't know what Suriname is, but it's like northeastern South America. It's a country that borders the northern side of Brazil. And the cool thing about Suriname is it is one of the most remote areas left in the world. It is between 90 and 94% undeveloped jungle. So like almost the whole country is completely undeveloped rainforest. And it also has very like rocky rivers compared to other spots in the Amazon, like Peru. So the rivers are not as navigable. So not as much of it has been explored. Big boats aren't going up these rivers and stuff. So basically what we did was a 14-day long kayak expedition. So this is Suriname. Up here is the capital city, Paramaribo, right on the coast. Pretty much from that city down is just undeveloped jungle. Like there's no roads, there's no nothing. There's like some indigenous villages and communities, and that's about it. So we flew from the capital city all the way to down like here somewhere in a little bush plane, and we got dropped off at some little flight strip in the middle of the jungle, basically. Grabbed all our gear, and we went and kayaked the full length of the Lucy River. So from that flight strip, we got on the South River, and we were on there for about 4 days. And then that's where the Lucy River starts. And then we kayaked basically from source to the end of the Lucy River. And there we ended up at a little indigenous village called Amatapo, and they also have a flight strip, and that's where we flew out of. So basically 14 days just living on the river, kayaking, super, super pristine jungle. The cool thing about the Lucy River is at the start of it, like where we ended in Amatapo, there's a bunch of rapids. The first like 5 kilometers are just tons of rapids and rocks, so boats can't make it up that river. So the only real way to explore the river is what we did, which is kayaking it. So it's probably, I think the company we went with, Unlock Nature, they had done it the year before in October. And I think that was only like the first or second time the like full length of the Lucy had ever been like officially explored. So it's really cool because like the animals down there, they haven't seen humans. They don't know what humans are, like it's like even the indigenous people don't go that far up the river to hunt and stuff because there's just no reason to. There's like so much pristine wilderness around where their villages are. So it's just super untouched wilderness. 14 days, we basically just lived on the kayaks. And then at night, we would just pull up, set up hammocks, set up a little camp, sleep, and then wake up in the morning and keep kayaking. So it was about 250 kilometers total. So 14
Wow.
days, 250-ish kilometers, and just untouched wilderness. It was awesome.
That is
Probably the
intense.
coolest thing I've ever done in my life.
I just even just sleeping in a hammock, I feel like that there's just like so much going on in the jungle, like bugs and insects and things like that, and like it's hot. And was there any? Did you have any issues, or was it just like the whole time you were just enjoying it?
It was awesome. We enjoyed it. It was definitely a challenge though. So like just the climate in general. We were there in October, so it's like the peak of the dry season. So it was like 90 to 100 degrees every single day during the day. And even in the peak of the dry season, it's 95 to 100% humidity, like with no breaks. So the heat was brutal. And I'm from a super dry climate. So I'm from a hot climate, but dry heat is very different than humid heat.
It's so different.
And
Yeah.
we were on kayaks, so you're in the sun all day long, just cooking. So I'm like pasty white guy from Utah, just cooking on my kayak. The river water, you're drinking river water, like with a filtered water bottle, but it's like 85-degree bath water. You're cooking all your food over a fire. So it's all like burning hot beans and lentils and fish that we were catching is basically what we ate the whole time. And then it's just hot all the time. Like even at night, it's like 80 degrees. So I brought like a little sleeping bag worried I'd get cold at night. And I was in my underwear just sliding around and sweating my hammock like every single night. I did not get even a fraction cold there the whole time. So that was the hardest part, is just the heat. It took me like 3 or 4 days to really get acclimatized to it. And then after that, I did pretty good. But I remember, I think it was like the third or fourth day, I got super heat stroke and I was like cold sweating. I was so heat stroke. And we left for lunch. I'd just eaten a bunch of hot beans. I was just dying. I remember telling Tiffany, my girlfriend, she was with me, and I told her, like, I don't know if I feel like I'm going to die. I'm feeling like really bad right now. And we turned the corner and there's just this wall of rapids, and we had to get out and unload everything from our kayaks, hike it over the rapids, then reload it up on the other side. And I was just like, well, I guess it's pretty motivating, when you don't have another choice, because there's not like, you can't bail once you're down there,
Yeah.
you pretty much have to get to that village to be able to fly home. So you just tough it out. But yeah, after the third or fourth day, I got acclimatized to it and got used to it. And it was pretty awesome. But as far as like bugs and stuff go, they were not nearly as bad as I expected. I guess the guides and everybody down there were telling me that Suriname really doesn't have bad bugs like Peru and stuff. Like I probably saw a couple mosquitoes the whole time I was there. Like
Really? Okay,
there's
wow.
like ants and stuff everywhere. So you can't just like go in the jungle and lay down on the ground. You'll get covered in stuff. Even though by the end of the trip we just were, you just didn't even care anymore. But yeah, the bugs and stuff really aren't that bad. I think on our very first night camping, you like hang up your hammock and you have your tarp and everything, and then your clothes and stuff are always kind of just wet and sweaty. So you like hang them up over your tarp on your hammock or on your string. So when you wake up in the morning, you have some somewhat dry clothes. And the very first morning, Tiffany, my girlfriend, woke up and went to shake out her pants, and a big, huge centipede like this big fell out of her pants.
Oh
But that was
my
like the
God.
worst scare we had with a bug. Other than that, it was that was like the only real incident.
Wow. And what about for animals? What kind of sort of things were you guys running into?
So I was hoping to find a lot more like snakes and stuff, but it turns out like kayaking all day long in the heat is so exhausting that there was not very many nights that we stayed up late enough to go herping all night. We were all like exhausted every night. But so we spent most of our time on the river during the day. So tons of cool birds. Like if you, it's like birders heaven down there. There's toucans and parrots and RSRs just everywhere, and all kinds of other really cool birds. There's tons of monkeys. I think we saw like 6 or 7 different species of really cool monkeys. Um, we saw capybara, we saw tapir. I did end up catching 2 anacondas while we were down there. That was really fun. That was like a life-changing experience for me. We missed one massive, massive anaconda. Like I'm talking like as big as I've ever seen a video of a female anaconda, and we didn't end up catching that one. It was a whole thing, but we ended up missing that one, and I was super sad about it. And then like 2 days later, we caught 2 smaller ones. I think the bigger one was probably about 10 foot long, a male, but that was a super cool experience. Like I got to catch it out of the water next to my kayak, so that was super
Wow.
fun. We saw
That's
some
amazing.
tapir. We saw yeah all kinds of little lizards and stuff, like some yeah, a lot of cool little lizards like Plika Plika and yeah, just a bunch of other stuff. A bunch of really cool fish, stingrays, just all kinds of stuff.
Now, what were some things that you felt like you learned from being in that environment that you could have implemented into your greenhouse, if any?
So one thing that surprised me, there's a couple things. One thing that kind of surprised me was actually inside the jungle, how little airflow there is. It's like the air is stagnant. There is no airflow like anywhere, like to the point where it's like miserable, you know? So out on the river, there's a little bit of a breeze and stuff. But regardless, I'm still going to keep airflow in my greenhouse just because I think it helps with things and keeps it fresh and stuff. But there's actually a lot less airflow than I expected inside the jungle. And then one other thing, like I said, we were there. This is probably the main thing I learned that was helpful to me is we were there during the peak of the dry season. So like just realizing the difference between wet and humid. There is a huge difference between wet and humid, and not all rainforests are these beautiful mossy cloud forests that you see. So like most of the places we were at in Suriname during the dry season when it hadn't rained for a few days, like the leaf litter is crunchy. You know, it's
Mm.
like it's still soaking wet there. It's still super humid. Like it's like 99% humidity, and leaf litter will still be crunchy if it hasn't had rain on it recently, you know? So like that made me feel more okay with during the summer when I'm running the vents and stuff a lot during the day, like letting things dry out. Cause I used to like not like it if everything, all the surfaces were drying out, I would try to like crank the misting system and then things would get too wet and my orchids and ferns don't do as good when it's too wet. And so it's like realizing the difference between humidity and wetness. That kind of
Yeah.
helped me out a lot.
Well, I guess that's probably where that atomizer, that high pressure misting system will come in, right? Where you're adding moisture to the air and you're not adding moisture to the ground.
Yep, I can add moisture to surfaces in large amounts. I can flood those surfaces when I want to with the rain system. And then, yeah, the high pressure misting will basically just keep moisture in the air without soaking everything around it. That's like the main idea behind it.
That's amazing. Well, Zach, this, like I said, this is such an incredible project. Is there anything else about the greenhouse that we didn't mention today that you think is worth people knowing before we wrap up? And if you think we covered,
Ah,
I think we covered a lot of it, so it's okay if you can't think of anything. And of course, I'll send people to your channel to get the real in-depth tours and everything. But yeah, if there is anything else that you feel like somebody should know, you can go ahead.
yeah, I don't have anything specific. I would just say, just know that like the greenhouse is like you said, it's a pipe dream for everybody, but that doesn't mean I'm like doing the coolest thing ever and I'm some sort of expert, like I am just a normal guy doing this, experimenting and learning as I go. But that being said, I do have a lot of experience keeping reptiles. I have a large understanding for the care of these animals and their wild environment. So if you are looking to replicate something, make sure you really, really look into it and do it right. And you're 100% welcome to reach out to me. I respond to pretty much all messages I get on Instagram. You're welcome to reach out with suggestions if you have any for me, or questions or anything like that. I'm more than happy to help if anybody is thinking of doing something similar on a similar scale or a smaller scale. But just know that it's not super easy. Things have to be well thought out, but it is possible if done correctly.
Yeah, that's well said. And obviously, you've already mentioned the financial equipment, the financial investment, but also the time investment as well. It's not something that you're in there a lot. You're making sure that it's operating properly. You're checking on the animals. It's not a weekend project that you can just set and forget. It's something that it's going to be like a relationship with this project for forever, really. So, Zach, thank you so much for laying it out for us and kind of walking us through the entire project. And like I said, we'll point people to your social media and YouTube so they can actually watch the videos. Can you let everybody know where they can find that?
Yeah, so you can find me on pretty much everything at A Life Exotic. So Instagram, YouTube. YouTube obviously is all my long form content. And then Instagram, TikTok, and recently I started doing Facebook too. So yeah, A Life Exotic. You can find all my stuff there. And if you want to get a hold of me, do it on Instagram. That's where I'm most likely to actually see a message and respond to it.
Awesome. Well, Zach, this was an absolute pleasure. We'll definitely have to have you back on it sometime in the future to get an update on the project. But until then, I'll be watching your videos and reels and shorts and whatnot with curiosity. I just love seeing it. So thank you so much for being on, and I can't wait to have you on again.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. I'm honored to be here. So thank you so much.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Zach, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast and sharing your journey of your greenhouse with the listeners and myself. Like I said, it's just a jaw-dropping project, and it'll be very fascinating to watch it develop over time. Listeners, is this something that you would actually tackle? Or are you like me, where you probably just want to admire it from a distance because it seems almost intimidating? But it is just a fascinating project. So if you did enjoy this episode, please consider sharing it on social media. That really does go a long way to helping find new listeners. If you want to support the show financially, you can do that over at patreon.com/animalsathome. If you're looking for more information on the podcast, just head to animalsathomenetwork.com, or if you'd like to buy yourself some merch for the podcast, you can do that at animalsathome.ca/shop. And I think that is it for this episode. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate your support, and I will catch you in the next episode.